The veterinarian had seen thousands of sick animals, but when he walked into Sarah's barn that morning, he stopped in his tracks. Then he looked at her and asked one question. "Sarah, how long has that been there?" She turned around, and what she saw made her stomach drop. It wasn't an injured cow. It wasn't a dead animal. It wasn't even something Sarah recognized. It was a strange, perfectly circular patch of bare ground in the middle of the barn floor. And somehow, every cow in the barn was standing as far away from it as possible. 3 days earlier, Sarah had noticed something strange. One of her cows had stopped entering the barn. That wasn't normal. The cow had slept there almost every night for years. But suddenly, she would walk toward the doorway, stop and back away. Sarah thought maybe the cow had hurt her leg. So she checked her carefully. Nothing. No swelling. No cuts. No obvious injury. The next morning, another cow did the same thing. Then another. By the third day, Sarah realized it wasn't one animal. Every cow was avoiding the same part of the barn. She moved their feed closer to the area. They refused to go near it. She moved the water trough. Same reaction. Even when she stood there herself, the cattle kept watching the floor. Sarah began wondering if there was something underneath it. But she couldn't see anything. The barn had been built decades earlier. The concrete floor was old, cracked in places, and covered with years of dust and dirt. Nothing looked unusual, until Sarah noticed the smell. It was faint, almost impossible to detect. But it wasn't the normal smell of a cattle barn. It was sharp, chemical-like. She opened the doors and windows, hoping the smell would disappear. It didn't. That's when she called her veterinarian. When the vet arrived, Sarah explained everything. He examined the cattle first. Their temperatures were normal. Their breathing was normal. Their eyes looked healthy. There were no obvious signs of disease. Then Sarah showed him the area the cattle had been avoiding. The veterinarian crouched down. He touched the concrete. He looked around. Then he stood up. "Have you changed anything recently?" Sarah shook her head. "No." The veterinarian walked around the strange patch again. Then he noticed something Sarah hadn't. The concrete around the circle was slightly darker, almost as if something underneath it had been releasing moisture. He pulled out a small testing instrument. The reading immediately changed. He tested another section. Normal. He returned to the circle. The reading changed again. The veterinarian's expression became serious. "Don't let the cattle stand here." Sarah immediately moved them outside. Then the vet asked her something even stranger. "Do you know what's underneath this floor?" Sarah didn't, and neither did the previous owner, at least as far as she knew. The barn had changed hands several times. Nobody had ever mentioned anything unusual beneath it. So Sarah called an older farmer who had lived nearby for decades. When she described the location, the man went silent. Then he told her something Sarah had never heard before. Years ago, before Sarah owned the property, that part of the barn had been used for storing agricultural chemicals and equipment. There had apparently been an old storage room underneath part of the structure, but it had been sealed off when the barn was renovated. Sarah suddenly understood why the cattle were avoiding the area. Something could be leaking upward. The veterinarian recommended bringing in an environmental specialist. They carefully removed a small section of the floor. And beneath the concrete, they found an old underground drainage channel. It was damaged. Water had been collecting inside it, and some of that water had been moving toward the surface. The specialist took samples. The results weren't something Sarah wanted to hear. There were traces of old agricultural chemicals in the soil and water beneath that section. The concentration wasn't immediately lethal to the cattle, but prolonged exposure could have caused serious problems. The cattle had been avoiding the area before Sarah even knew there was a problem, and suddenly their strange behavior made perfect sense. They weren't afraid of the barn. They weren't sick. They weren't being difficult. They were reacting to something Sarah couldn't see, something they could apparently smell or sense before she ever noticed it. Sarah had the contaminated material removed and the damaged drainage system repaired. The floor was replaced. The entire barn was professionally tested. Only after the area was declared safe did Sarah allow the cattle back inside. And something remarkable happened. The cows walked through the barn normally. No hesitation. No backing away. No staring at the floor. It was as if nothing had ever happened. But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about that first morning, because the veterinarian had walked into her barn expecting to find a sick animal. Instead, he found evidence of a problem hidden beneath the floor, and the animals had discovered it first. That's the part Sarah says still bothers her. She had walked across that exact spot hundreds of times. She had swept it, fed animals beside it, worked around it, and never suspected a thing. But her cattle noticed. Maybe they detected a smell. Maybe they sensed something in the air. Or maybe they simply knew that something about that place had changed. Whatever the explanation, their behavior gave Sarah the warning she needed. And now, whenever one of her animals suddenly refuses to enter a familiar place, Sarah doesn't ignore it. Because sometimes the strangest warning isn't a sound. It isn't a smell. It isn't something you can see. Sometimes, it's an animal simply refusing to go where it normally goes. And if Sarah had ignored her cattle that week, she might never have discovered what was hiding beneath her barn.